Have you ever wondered? Ever wondered?
Welcome to Have You Ever Wondered? I'm Carlene Cross, author and teacher. Today, we will be interviewing Lynne McTaggart. Lynne is an award-winning journalist and an author of 7 books, including the international bestsellers, The Power of 8, The Field, The Intention Experiment, and The Bond, all considered seminal books of the new science, now translated into 30 languages. She's consistently voted one of the world's top 100 spiritual leaders for her groundbreaking work with consciousness and the power of intention. Lynne is known for the quality of her writing and in-depth research and her inspirational speaking style. She speaks to worldwide audiences and workshops in continents around the world, from Hawaii to Kuwait to Kuala Lumpur. Lynne has won a number of international awards for her writing and her groundbreaking spiritual work, including the New York Women's Press Club Award of Merit and the London Times Business Award for Columnist of the Year. I just want to say how delighted I am to have you today, Lynne. As I mentioned earlier, I have followed your work for years and been really so impressed with your work and also your combination of just incredible research, but also the practical aspect of your work, where you help people to incorporate all of this quantum physics and some of this really complicated stuff. And so that kind of leads me. Well, first, I want to ask you, you've got such a fascinating background with your investigative journalism. And what made you decide to investigate things like quantum physics and consciousness from an investigative journalist education?
Well, I began life, as you said, wanting to put bad guys in jail. So my early stories were things like busting baby selling rings, which were rings of lawyers who were involved in what is called gray market adoption. It's not illegal, but it should have been. And so I unraveled some of them, did some role play, as a pregnant woman at the time. I was in my 20s, or a prospective adoptive parent. And it was a time of hidden tape recorders and all of that sort of thing. And when I moved to the UK, I got very interested in health. I had been an editor of a newspaper syndicate while I was still in New York, and I had helped to launch a column called The People's Doctor by the late Dr. Robert Mendelsohn. And here was this very respectable doctor who was on the licensing board of the state of Illinois, savaging modern medicine and basically saying it's dangerous and unproven in most cases. So I was fascinated by that, and it really got me interested in writing about health. When I got over here, after having an illness for a while that conventional medicine didn't know what to do with, but I finally found a really far-sighted integrative specialist, and this is back in the 1980s, who worked out that I had a faulty microbiome, and it sorted it out. And these days it would be nothing. It would be, take some probiotics and some grapefruit seed extract. But at the time they didn't know. So I was so impressed by it that I started telling everybody. And my husband, who's also a journalist, started saying to me, why don't you stop telling me and tell the world? So we decided to launch what was then a newsletter called What Doctors Don't Tell You. It's still going, but has been a magazine for 10 years, 11 years now. So in the process of examining research about what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine, mostly what doesn't work in conventional medicine and what does work in alternative medicine, I kept coming across very good studies of things like acupuncture, homeopathy, spiritual healing. And I kept thinking, particularly on the spiritual healing stuff, if you can have a thought and send it to someone else and make them better, that has to undermine everything we think about how the world works. So I started thinking there might be such a thing as human energy fields.
Mm.
So I wrote up a proposal and really started on a journey after a publisher bought the book without a compass. I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought I was looking for human energy fields, but I thought I'll start talking to quantum physicists and scientists who are doing work in consciousness research, and they'll be able to tell me. And I thought it would be really a simple job of having them tell me writing it up and handing it in. That's not what happened. What I did not expect is that I was going to dive so deeply into quantum physics and that each of these scientists had discovered evidence of what compounded together into a completely new science, a new view of the world. And what was astonishing to me, and also I approached it all with trepidation, is scientists don't like to venture beyond their stuff, their experimental data. And so they'll write that up, but they don't want to talk about or speculate what this all means, or much less to put it all together. Plus the fact, scientists talk in code, they talk in math. So for me, the other aspect of it, aside from synthesizing all of this, was also to decode quantum physics into something people could understand. So that task resulted in my book, The Field. But with each book, there's been a little bit of unfinished business. So with The Field, there was some decent evidence that thoughts are not only things, but things that affect other things. So I wanted to take that further and say, okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about shifting a quantum particle, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? And I also wanted to know how far we could take this and what happened in groups. So if we have more than one person, does it magnify the effect? So by then, The Field was in about 30 languages. So I thought to myself, well, I have a lot of readers out there. And I also knew a lot of scientists by that time. And I thought to myself, if I just put them together, have the scientists create certain experiments, and then have the readers at some set time all send the same intention together, we'll have the biggest global laboratory to test this in the world. So that's what I did in 2007. And we've run 41 experiments to date, everything from trying to make seeds grow faster, to purifying water, to lowering violence in war-torn areas, to healing someone of PTSD. And of those 41, 37 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. So they were amazing. But then I tried to shrink this all down. I thought to myself, well, we're getting these incredible outcomes. What would happen if we just had small groups doing this? Because I was running some of my first workshops in this area, and I wanted to have them experience group intention, but I wasn't sure what to do. So I was kicking around with my husband, the idea with my husband and our team one day, and I said, I don't know, maybe I'll put them in groups of 8 or so and have them send intention to someone with a health challenge. And my husband is a great headline writer, and he said, I love this, The Power of 8. And that's how we got the title. And that's what we did. Put people into groups of 8, had them send intention to somebody in the group with a health challenge, had them come back the next day, and expected it to be a very mild effect, like getting your back rubbed. But that wasn't what happened at all. What happened was people coming back. One woman who had serious arthritis in one knee and was limping came back walking normally and said, my knee feels normal today. And somebody else who had a very bad gut, irritable bowel syndrome, said, my gut feels normal. Somebody else with depression saying, who suffered from periodic clinical depression. I feel lifted today. I feel normal. And someone else, the most amazing of all, with cataracts, who said, I feel like they're 80% better.
Wow, that's wild.
So
Again,
this is how it got me to my place now, really
yes,
by asking more questions.
yes. Well, you are so brilliant with taking, and I want to dive into some of the quantum physics stuff because you take this really complicated, in many ways, scientific information that people think they can't understand, and you're a brilliant writer as well, but you're able to take these concepts and make them understandable for the average human being, which is a big task. And so I wondered how you can so eloquently, like, interview a quantum physicist and then come out and be able to turn it into writing that people want to read and that they understand.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a writer. That is my interest, that's my passion. And I'm very interested in narrative nonfiction, which means nonfiction that reads like a novel and uses certain novelistic techniques. So I realized that I would put everybody to sleep unless I told a story. And so I did tell a story with the field and the intention experiment about these scientists who are making these discoveries, but sort of wove it together. And in terms of trying to understand quantum physics, I interviewed, my journalistic background came in handy because I interviewed many of them 20 times. I'm used to digging very deeply. And with some of them, I would have to talk to them about, now explain to me what quantum coherence is. And of course, they would talk in math and gibberish, and it's scientific speak. So I'd say, okay, let me see if I can create an analogy for what you're saying, a metaphor. That sounds like squeezed cotton wool. Is that right? And, we would go back and forth like that, and almost in this dialogue until I had kind of understood what they were talking about, but could convey it in some sort of metaphoric way.
That's great.
The
Yes.
stories I'm used to telling, but what I had to do was learn quantum physics. And of course, this is, I don't mean to practice it or write in their code, but to understand the basic principles of it and some of the aspects of what these people were discovering.
Yes, yes. Well, let's talk about that. So, I'm fascinated with the entanglement and the implications of that. So, what for you are the implications of entanglement to the interconnectedness of the universe? How do you think that plays out?
Well, let me answer that question by talking about one of my intention experiments. Back in about 2007 or 8, I did an experiment with Dr. Gary Schwartz, who is a psychologist at the University of Arizona. And I worked with him on a number of our early studies. What we did for this one was he had a whole laboratory of consciousness research, and he and it was funded by the National Institutes of Health. He took 4 sets of seeds, his lab team, and they put them as A, B, C, D. They took photos of them, sent them to me. I had a talk at the time that was going to be in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of about 750. So I went to Sydney and I engaged them in this intention experiment. I had them choose the target, A, B, C, D. It was just a picture of seeds in these little pods that they're like trays for each set. We didn't tell the scientists which ones we'd chosen, but we did the intention for 10 minutes. I then called them to say it's done, but still didn't tell them which seeds, but that was their cue to plant the seeds. And 5 days later, they measured the seedlings. And it was only after they finished measuring that I unblinded the study and told them, well, it was seeds A or whichever one it was. And lo and behold, they were the set of seeds that grew significantly higher than controls. And we had done a very specific intention to make them grow higher and to a certain height at a certain time. We ran that experiment 5 more times in different locations, in Rhinebeck, New York, and different sized audiences: South Carolina, Dallas, Texas, LA, California, and over the internet, involving all of my readers around the world who wanted to take part, doing the intention through my website at the exact same time. And every single time, the seeds sent intention grew higher than controls. Now, let's just unpack that first experiment. I mean, they all work like this, but let's look at the first one. So I'm there with my audience in Sydney, Australia. The seeds are sitting in Tucson, Arizona. That is 8,000 miles away, going via California, the short way. Now, also, we're not sending intention to the seeds. We sent intention to a photograph of the seeds, a symbolic representation of the seeds. Nevertheless, we had an effect. That, to me, is an example of a psychic internet that we create. Call it entanglement, call it whatever, but holding on to the same thought creates some sort of extraordinary connection that can affect something 8,000 miles away. Now, the same thing happens when I'm doing intention experiments over the internet, where people are in front of their own computer screens individually in places around the world. And we're only joining together via some platform, whether it's my website, whether it is YouTube or some sort of platform, Facebook, whatever. People are joining together, and yet we have an effect. And they also talk about feeling it, feeling intense energy or goosebumps up and down their arms, or crying uncontrollably, or saying, I feel like I'm in the tractor beam of Star Trek. So all of this somehow has an effect on them. So that's one practical example of entanglement. But for anybody who doesn't understand it, quantum particles, once they bump into each other, they are connected through all space and time. So think of them like twins separated at birth. So let's say we've got Jan and Jean. They're separated at birth. Jan goes to live in New York. Jean stays in London. They both grow up loving the color blue. They both end up, even though they don't ever see each other again, they both marry a guy called Bill. And when Jan is out there in Vail skiing and breaks her leg, so does Jean, even though she's sitting in Starbucks drinking a flat white or a latte. So as you can see, once they're connected for all time. And that's what happens with quantum particles too.
No, they're separated across, the universe. Well, so tell me about the 0 point field then. So in this area that we thought was just space, empty space, there are actually energy particles. What is it that bumps around that makes maybe this communication possible? So it connects, whether it's our energy, our mind. How does that work?
Okay, the 0 point field is created because quantum particles aren't particles at all. They're vibrating packets of energy, sending energy back and forth to other quantum particles, other vibrating packets of energy, like an endless game of quantum tennis. Now, the energy created through one tennis game is teensy. It's like a half a watt's worth of energy, nothing to write home about. But when you have this tennis game, that little energy that's created that gets sent back and forth is a virtual particle. And when you calculate, and it lasts only for the blink of an eye, less than a blink of an eye, but it keeps getting created. New virtual particles keep getting created. And if you add up all of the subatomic particles in the world. We're made of them. Everything is made of them. Doing this little tennis game with other subatomic particles in all the things in all the world, you end up with this totally unfathomable amount of energy just sitting out there in empty space like some supercharged backdrop. Now, if you were sitting 1 yard away from me, if we were in person, the energy between us would be enough to boil all the oceans of the world. That's how energy dense this empty space is. Now, there are two important aspects of the zero-point field. Number one, quantum particles, when they bump into each other, they take on each other's information. And they have a near infinite capacity to store information. For instance, the Library of Congress. That's every book published in English. If you were to take that and put it in a quantum wave or particle, it would fit into the size of a sugar cube. All of those books, all of those words, all of that information would fit into the size of a sugar cube as a quantum wave. The second thing, and waves and particles are more or less the same thing. They call them that, but they're basically just vibrating packets of energy. A quantum wave goes on essentially to infinity. So what I've described is a mechanism, a matrix in which there is all this information there. Remember, it's almost like a shadow universe of all information in the world, and also information or a connection that can be maintained across all space and actually all time. So you have a neat matrix and mechanism for explaining some of the extra sensory things that we are capable as human beings. We're capable of as human beings.
That's amazing. And so you think like healers have either been born with the ability to tap into this web, or they learn how to do it. Do you think that each one of us has an ability to, through meditation, to tap into this field, this matrix web?
I'm certain of it. I've seen it thousands of times. You don't have to be a gifted healer to be able to heal, to be able to tap into. Now, remember too, we're not diving into the field. We are part of the field. We're already there. And we already have these capacities in us. We have the ability to heal ourselves. We have the ability to send intention and affect somebody else. We have the ability to do ESP, to forecast things, to pick up things out of the future. We have all of those capabilities to remote view, but we don't learn how to do it. We know this as a child. We know we have these amazing magical powers, if you will, but we get dampened down by authority figures, by our teachers, our parents, or whatever. And so we stop believing in our latent human capacities. It's like playing the piano. There are certain people who are gifted and continue to carry on with it, but everyone has the capacity to learn how to do this. We all do. Now, in order to do it, what I work on is group intention. And I find that supersizes the effect. I do Power of 8 groups with people where I'm introducing them to it for the first time in a workshop or in a conference. I'll put the audience into groups of 8 or so have them send intention to somebody with a health challenge, explain the rudimentaries of what to do. And, there are always people in the audience who are immediately better or healed. I had a woman last autumn in one of my big talks who had her vocal cords had frozen. She could not speak. And after one 10-minute intention, she was able to speak. And I met her several months later. She was still able to speak.
That's amazing.
I'm somebody else in an audience of mine in January. I'm just thinking of the more dramatic cases.
Sure.
Was paralyzed on his right side because of an irregularity in his spine, his spinal cord. and it had got worse with some drugs that some doctors had given him. He had got better then after a while, but his muscles were atrophied. He still couldn't move his leg. After one 10-minute intention, he could. And he came up to me and talked to me, and I videoed his story. And I've seen 2 other people get up out of their wheelchairs. I've had numerous cases of stage 4 cancer reversed. We've had just about everything. A woman going blind from a retinal detachment has 20/20 vision now. And more and more and more. I've seen thousands of cases like this. And what I find is you don't need hours of priming. Like, you don't have to go into deep meditation for 45 minutes and then suddenly you're there. Although meditation is wonderful, helps with certain things like remote viewing. But a Power of 8 group is a bit like priming. We measured this with brainwave studies I carried out at Life University with a team of neuroscientists. They put them at my disposal because they were fascinated by the Power of 8 work. And we discovered very quickly that within a minute or two, and this is among total novices who had never done this before or even meditated, parts of the brain, the back of the head, the parietal lobes, they sit here. They help us navigate through space. They tell us what's me, what's not me. They were dialed way down. So were the temporal lobes, again, involved in navigating through space, and the right frontal lobes involved in worry, doubt, negativity. All of these were dialed way down. And the brainwave signatures looked nothing like those of meditation. They looked almost identical, however, to brainwave studies done of Sufi masters during chanting or Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer by the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Andrew Newberg, the well-known neuroscientist. So our people in our study, but also in all the groups I work with and talk about, very quickly enter a state of ecstatic oneness. And I think I think the sense of oneness is one of the big secret sauces of a Power of 8 group.
Okay. So does it, the intention, well, first I want to ask you, how do you get people to, they just sit down and start, do you have a certain protocol or whatever that you have them follow to get into a zone, or how is that? How does it operate?
I teach 13 keys to intention mastery, and some of them are counterintuitive for people because people think they've maybe studied with other people or followed certain urban myths, and they think they need to take an hour to get into the zone. They think that they need to do this or maybe call in the archangels or have white lights or purple flames, all of that sort of stuff. And I found you don't. I put together a protocol after studying master healers, Buddhist monks, and Qigong masters. And although many of them had their own unique type of modalities, they also had certain commonalities. And I distilled them and also took some other aspects, some other practices used by scientists in laboratory studies of intention and put them together. And that became my 13 keys. So I teach people a protocol, but there's one thing that people don't usually do. And the biggest problem is they're usually not specific enough. Most people think, well, I better not be too specific because the universe won't give me, anything better, or won't even give me that. Or I better not mention cancer in my intention because I'll get more cancer. And all of that is really fallacious in my experience. I found that when you want to be healed of cancer, or a group is going to heal you of cancer, saying, our intention is that Jane Doe be immediately, completely, and permanently healed of all traces of breast cancer and any metastases, and be healthy and well in every way, for instance. Now, what I've said was something positive. She is to be immediately healed of this. So it's okay to mention what you want to have. Tell the universe what you want. And we found that with intention experiments, when we've just sent, say, love to water, nothing happened. When we said our intention is that the water increase to alkalinity by 1 complete pH, it did.
Oh my gosh. You know what's exciting about that is we just don't realize how much power that we have to tap into these incredibly exciting, this energy that surrounds us. And I think we're the ones that hold ourselves back. It's easy to feel like, oh, I'm like you said, I can't ask for specific things because that's too wild, that's too crazy. I'm just gonna uh, but I mentioned to you in one of my questions that I remember, I was in the church for a while, I'm a minister's wife. I'm not religious anymore, but I saw even in those days so many things that through prayer, that were stunning to me. And after I left the church, one of the things that brought me back to consider spirituality was remembering some of those amazing events where, and it was a group of people that would get together, and they did ask in the way that you just described. They said, Jesus heal, and they would be very, very specific. And what do you think about, so when people talk to Jesus or Buddha, or do you think that is all just part of this web, this net that maybe necessarily isn't Jesus or Buddha, but it's tapping into that energy?
Well, yeah, it could well be. I mean, you know, we won't really know
Yeah.
the extent of Jesus until we
Right.
pass on. When we fall off the perch and go into the new perch, we will discover. And, my husband was just reading a book about near death experiences, which is a scientific study of it by a doctor who was very skeptical and then really drilled into it deeply. And it's powerfully convincing. And he goes into so many case studies, and there's all kinds of science in it. It's really interesting. But what what they all describe is going to a place that is really amazing. And we'll find out whether that is connected to those people that we have revered and prayed to, etc. We'll find out. But I think the point is a bigger point. I'm deliberately made the intention work secular because I don't want it attached to any one religion. I want everybody to experience a sense of the magnificence of our own spirituality and our own abilities. And I want it to be an ecumenical church. As I always say, everybody's welcome at my church, whether it's whatever you believe, whatever your religious beliefs or political beliefs or other kinds of beliefs. I welcome people in. And so I think, the basis of the religions that we know do have some overlaps with what I do. I mean, when I was looking for an antecedent to the Power of Eight groups, I figured out, I couldn't have been the first one who thought this up. Somebody else must have thought of it. And I looked at the various religions, and while they had prayer groups, they didn't have anything like what I was doing. And they have them minions in the Jewish religion and prayer groups and lots of others. But what I did find, the earliest thing I found was actually from Jesus in the Acts, which is the recording of what Jesus told his disciples to do to start the church. And this is after he is supposedly ascended, and they are putting together, they're just starting the church, and they're talking about it, and they're talking about his teachings. And in the King James Version of the Bible, they have a very anemic translation of what he was talking about. They say he always instructed them to pray with one accord. And that is just such a terrible translation of the original. But even in the Hellenic Greek, for instance, which the Bible was then translated into, they have they were to pray, and the word they used was homothumadon, which is it means passionately and with one voice. Think of a Beethoven symphony where all of the individual instruments come together with this extraordinary, explosive collective sound. Well, that is exactly what he was talking about. And he talked about numerous times in the Acts, pray together and you will heal and you will be healed.
Yep.
So I think, whoa, okay, well, he was talking about it right back then. He was talking about groups. Well, when two or more are gathered.
Yes.
So
yes.
I started thinking, well, certainly it was around in his time. And I think the concept of group prayer has been around. Usually the problem is there's one leader and everybody else is just following. And what we do is much more ecumenical in the sense that we put everybody together and there's no leader. They're all
That's
intending
great.
at the same time.
That's wonderful. And your global laboratory, I just think, and I'm come back to what I said at the beginning, you're not only able to explain these things in a way that people can understand, but then you have like this global laboratory where you pull people together and from all over the world, right, into these small groups where you're really making this stuff applicable to change the world, which is what we need. We need this idea that we do have the power to come together and make a difference. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about this current work where you're pulling people together in these groups of 8 and you're reaching out to change the world.
Okay, so I'm going to just tell you one thing about the intention experiments and the Power of 8 groups, but particularly the intention experiments that really blew my mind and made me think about it in a very different way. Since 2008, when we did our first peace intention experiment and we were focusing on ending the Sri Lankan war, very, very ambitious.
Yes.
But we did this, and afterward, and by the way, I mean, we had some extraordinary results. The government won a number of decisive battles just during the week we did intention. We did it 10 minutes a day for 8 days. That turned around the entire course of the war. Did we do this? Within a few months, this 25-year war had been intractable. The government took back the North, which had been choked off by the rebel forces. And then a few months after that, this 25-year war was over. Now, those battles changed around the entire course of the war. Did we do this? We don't know. There are many, many variables. But probably even more amazing was what happened to the participants. So I surveyed people, and I have done so since 2008. Anybody who's took part has to sign up. And I send them a survey, and a good percentage respond. And I say to them, I had started at the time just to find out, can they get onto my website? How was it for them? And I was absolutely astonished to hear the responses because people were saying, I'm getting along better with my estranged partner. My children who haven't spoken to me for 5 years suddenly called up. It's completely night and day with my boss now. I'm getting along better with my coworkers, and on and on and on. About 40% said things like that. Then, even more amazingly, 50%, half of all respondents said, I'm more in love with everybody I come in contact with.
Oh, wow.
And
that's amazing.
The other thing of it, that was amazing to me. Then the other aspect of it was about a third each time say, they have improved or cured some sort of health challenge. The pain has gone away. They don't have their migraines anymore, their blood pressure has gone down, their knee is working better, whatever. It's all extraordinary to me. So I started saying, wow, there's this rebound effect. And I started also thinking about networks of people. Let's just look at this. Nicholas Christakis at the University of Harvard, he's a professor there who studies social networks, and he's shown how they are infectious, so that happy people are more likely to have happy friends, not because of they self-select happy people to be with, but because of the natural spread of happiness. The same thing happens with all sorts of things, but here's the most interesting. When somebody does a good deed, is just kind, altruistic in some way, that spreads 3 degrees down a social network. So if Jane is kind to Paul, he's more likely to be kind to Jim, who's more likely to be kind to Sam, who's more likely to be kind to Robert, so forth. So imagine we had 30,000, 15,000 people said they're more in love with everybody they come in contact with. Think of the ripple effect of the social network. Each person, on average, says Columbia University, the latest estimate is each person has about 600 contacts. Let's say those 15,000 who are in love with people now, everybody they come in contact, spread that joy to their friends. You're starting to talk about 500 million people who could be affected. So I've started thinking about that. The other thing I've started thinking about is what I call the 8 revolution, because, I look at what's going on right now and I think, wow, these leaders don't know what to do. We don't have any good leaders in the world. We need a grassroots movement. We need an army of social change agents. And then I started thinking, well, I have a potential army of social change agents. There are tens of thousands of Power of 8 groups. So what if I put them all together? I could have this, if I had them connect with each other and maybe, use some basic tools to start healing things in their neighborhood, would that create major change? So I've started doing that. I've put together some free tools on my website, lynnmctaggart.com, under the 8 revolution, to help people use intention methods in their community, working together with others to change the way they do things just locally. And we'll see what happens with that.
And I encourage everybody to go to Lynn's website. Your description on the website is just lovely. You talk about, this grassroots movement, because the leaders don't seem to be, don't understand this sort of change. But we can from the bottom up, if people will come together. And so how do you do that, Lynn? Do you have, are you communicating with all of these groups of 8 through your website, or how do you propose a certain thing that you want to focus on?
Well, I give them free tools if they join my community, and they're right on the community site. And the community site is essentially like a private Facebook section. People can join groups or have a group join together, get hold of the free tools and start communicating with other groups. And so we're just in the process of getting people to join, but then, and we have a bunch of things for them to use, but then we're going to start getting them to connect with each other. And I can broadcast to everybody in my community. And by the way, all of this is free. We don't charge anything for joining the community or having these tools. We just want to see it spread.
Well, I just joined myself, so I'm really excited about getting involved. And I have a question about energy. So you talk about people who are, happy. Do you think when we are happy and we exude this happiness energy, that attracts then other happy people sort of it's like you send out this energy and these vibrations, and I know when I consciously do that in a store or kindness to people, I feel like it sort of comes back around. Is there the law of attraction? I guess it comes back to us then.
And you could be changing, it's more than that. You could be creating their happiness in the sense that there's been some good studies about this, the ripple effect. There was a woman called Siegel Barsad she is an economist, and she has studied the ripple and written about the ripple effect. And she noticed it when she was young, and she was working in an office, and she realized it was the glummest place to be in because nobody was talking to each other. People were just keeping to themselves. And, people were just sort of snarly. And then the whole mood in the office changed one day, and she could never figure it out. People were talking by the coffee machine. Suddenly there was this buoyant, happy mood. And she suddenly realized that a grumpy coworker of theirs was on vacation. And that buoyant mood lasted the entire week until she came back. So we actually do affect people around us. So if you are happy and buoyant and positive, you are more likely to affect. You don't just attract people who are happy, you change people to become happy.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, I interviewed a woman who'd had a near-death experience some time ago, Betty Erd, and she said when she actually got to heaven, this ripple effect, she could actually see it happen on the earth, that when people sent out certain vibrations, or I don't know what, that there was an actual ripple that then affected, you know, everything around them. And I thought that was pretty fascinating that she said it is truly real, it's so that's fascinating, isn't it?
So
Well,
interesting.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I have one last question. I'm just so impressed with your life and your work. And tell me what doing all this incredible work on energy and quantum physics and intention, how has it changed your life? How do you feel different than you were before, say, you started discovering this amazing stuff?
That's a great question. Well, it did change the messenger because suddenly my eyes were open to a completely new science, a new view of the world. And from there, it was about me saying, okay, what does this mean? What are the implications of this? How do we live this? If we're not separate, if we are all part of this energy field, if our capacity, our human capacity is far beyond what we understand now in terms of our senses, that we can move well beyond our senses and well beyond our location, even well beyond our time, forward and backward. Well, that changes the whole ball game. So much of those questions were really prompters for the next book. It was in terms of, okay, what's leftover business here? What else should I tackle? And I continually do it and continue to do it. I've been very interested in time recently, and certainly every quantum physicist alive these days says there's no such thing as time. There's no place in the brain that understands time. We humans create time as an arrow, but time is much more like one big smeared out now in the quantum world. So for me, and there's a lot of evidence looking at intention back in time and remote viewing forward in time and other things forward in time. So I am playing around a lot with that. I have a new course coming up called Your Intentional Future, and I'm going to have people remote view their own future and do some other things where we're playing out of time. As I do with intention, I do a lot of retro intention with people in my workshops and retreats. So I continue to try to extend the implications of what I discovered way back with the field.
It's beautiful. It reminds me of when you were a little girl and you said to your mom, I'm gonna learn astronomy today. It's like you have tackled this life with such vigor and such intelligence and really beauty and kindness. And I'm so, so thankful that you took time out to talk to us. And I'm, like I said, I'm signed up. I'm really excited to work with one of your groups and like you say, see what we can do to do the best in this world that we can and make it a difference. So thank you so much for being with us. And um, like I said, I'm excited to work for you with you. And I hope that everyone that listens to this podcast will get on your website, www.lynnmctaggart.com, and join in. We'll change the world.
Absolutely. And it's always started with small groups. Every social movement started with a tiny group, whether it was Gandhi or Martin Luther King, and maybe you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
that's what. Thank you, Lynn. I really thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for my interview with Lynne McTaggart. If you would like to know more about Lynn's research and work, open my website at www.haveyoueverwonderedpodcast.com and open the guest link.
Have you ever